There are some major shakeups happening on the global stage, and the US dollar could soon be dethroned as the world reserve currency. It's time we dive into how dire these implications could be, and what that means for you and your family. Let's get it. Welcome to BitBoy Crypto. My name is Ben. In this video, we're going to talk about BRICS, which is one of the biggest threats to the global dominance of the US dollar. BRICS is an acronym that represents the economic cooperation between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The term was initially coined by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill, who put forward an investment thesis about how these countries would be leading the global economy in future generations. His paper was published in November of 2001, and it marked the beginning of large investments into the BRICS nations from Goldman Sachs and other Western investment firms. The BRICS portfolio at Goldman Sachs alone was as high as $100 billion at its all-time high, but they closed down their fund in 2015 as a result of a few slow years of growth in these countries. They weren't alone, and other firms began doing the same because the market sentiment was so bearish at the time. This was around the same time that tensions really started to heat up between the US and the two largest countries in the BRICS bloc, China and Russia. In the past few years, the US has imposed strict economic sanctions on both of these countries, which has made trade very difficult for the BRICS nations. Even sanctions for countries outside of BRICS still cause complications because it limits how many trading partners they can have. As more sanctions continue to be imposed around the world, BRICS and other economic alliances between countries outside of the US, well, they started to become more and more important. Governments around the world began to realize that the US could cut them off from the global economy at any moment. So they started forming closer trade relationships with each other, just in case that ever happened. And hey, can you blame them? The problem here is, in the past few months, there's been a major shift. The US dollar has shown signs of weakness, and the governments around the world, well, they're announcing that they're distancing their dependence on the dollar. This week, it was reported that 19 more countries are looking to join BRICS, which means that they're going to need to come up with a much bigger acronym, maybe BRIC Nation. Other reports have suggested that some of these governments are planning for a BRICS currency that will somehow be backed by gold. Politicians here in the US are able to set the rules of international trade because the dollar is the global reserve currency. And we all assume that this is for the benefit of all Americans, but is that really true? Not so fast. A lot of people in our industry have been questioning this narrative. My favorite financial influencer, Lynn Alden, great influencer, love her, believes that the dollar's status as the global reserve currency requires the United States to constantly run a trade deficit. In other words, this could be one of the reasons why we have been consuming and spending a lot more than we produce here, and why we outsource many of our jobs to other countries. Taxes and regulation have also played a major role in this global economic shift, as Peter St. Onge of the Mises Institute has pointed out. Alden also says that having an all-fiat global monetary system encourages countries to manipulate their currencies to stay competitive with one another. Before we continue with the implications, let's take a moment to thank our channel sponsor that makes all this possible, Stake. Thank you, Stake. All of these factors that come along with having a global reserve currency actually hurt Americans by giving us higher prices, fewer jobs, and higher taxes. In an article for Bitcoin Magazine, Alex Gladstein lays out the case that if any of the dollar's status as the global reserve currency has had significant military costs, which takes resources away from other areas of the domestic economy. Politicians and bankers and people who own a lot of stock in corporations are the ones who really have something to gain by maintaining the dollar as the global reserve currency. But most of us really don't see any benefits. So what will things look like for the average American if the dollar loses its status as the global reserve currency? Well, it depends. If another country or alliance of countries like BRICS were able to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency, that would actually be bad for the entire US economy, including the average worker that's living paycheck to paycheck. Now, that's not actually what I think is going to happen though. The US became the global reserve currency under some very unique conditions that will hopefully never be replicated again. It was right after World War II, when the US was one of the only few stable economies in the entire world because we spared most of the destruction from the war. The situation we're in right now, well, it's very different because there's a lot more competition. Even among the BRICS nations, there's not a united front. China is clearly the most powerful, and they're hoping for the digital yuan to be as influential as possible. But many BRICS governments have been very resistant to China's push for global influence. Both Brazil and India have refused to participate in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which invests in developing economies and leaves them with a pile of debt. There are way too many competing parties for a monopoly to emerge, and none of these governments trust any of the others with the power of a global currency. What the world needs is something neutral, and the option that we have that actually works, well, that's crypto. Even the governments that hate crypto will be forced to use it because it will be the only neutral and reliable means of international trade. They won't want to use something that is controlled by another government. This is probably going to be a long-term process that takes many years to happen. It won't happen overnight, but things are definitely going in that direction. This will be good news for the average person of every country. Our economic systems will be more honest and less corrupt, so we will hopefully see much less inequality. We could even see more peace in the world as governments shift from competition to cooperation. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The fight is just beginning to be fought. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.